Hey gang, Scott Davenport here, and in this video I'm talking about physical filters for our cameras, those pieces of glass that we put in front of our lenses to do certain things for our photos, and why I still use them, why I think they're important. And this stems from a question I got from Linda, and she asked me exactly this. Well, we've got all these powerful digital tools, these physical filters, are they still valuable? Are they still useful? Why do you carry them around? I'll talk about this in the realm of my photography. Your photography style may be different, and so take the information, apply it to your own situation, and you can decide whether or not some or all of the filters I discuss here are meaningful and useful to you. So let's get into it. Now, there are a few types of filters that I use, and there's one kind I don't, and I don't think I'll ever buy one at this stage, given that we do have certain digital tools, and I'll get to that. The first one I want to talk about is the most simple, a UV filter. So it's something like this, screws into the front of your lens. It's clear glass, and its real purpose is to protect the front element, and that can be from conditions, salt, dust in the air, rainwater not so much. Rainwater's clean. If you were to drop your lens, you would prefer a less expensive filter to break as opposed to your more expensive lens. It doesn't really change any of the optics or the image quality. It's purely a protection device, provided you get a good quality one. The ones I use are from B+W, and I really like these particular UV filters. I do go back and forth on having them on the lens, and I tend to put them on when I know I'm going to be either getting really up close and personal with the ocean, or I'll be in aforementioned dusty, nasty types of conditions where I want to make sure that the front element of my lens doesn't take the brunt of that. Next up is a polarizer, and I think a polarizer is critical. If you're doing landscape work, you want a polarizer. What a polarizer will do, really two main things that it accomplishes. One is it tends to enrich colors, and really what it's doing is the second part is managing reflections and glare. And so, this here is a drop-in polarizer from Haida, and I can rotate the polarizer right up on the top there. And that's a key thing about a polarizer is it is directionally oriented, and it maximizes this effect of cutting reflections, cutting glare when the light source is at a 90-degree angle to your camera, the front element of your camera. I've got a few other videos about polarizers and things like that, and I'll put links to them in the show notes. But the reason I think that they're important, and I can't just go into a processing tool to cut away reflections and glare, is best illustrated by an example. So let me show you these photos. One is with a polarizer and one without. On the left-hand side is a shot without the polarizer. And you can see lots of shine and glare coming off the rocks, all of this stuff coming off the water. Now, I can open up the tools and I can start lowering highlights or trying to adjust white point or do something like that. But what won't happen is that these stones and these wonderful pebbles that are underneath this water, the tools aren't going to fill that in for me. I'm just going to get, a duller shine or less shine on this water. I'm not going to see all of this very nice, pleasing, interesting detail. And to me, this is part of the photo. That's an important part of the photo. Are the tools getting there? Will there be some AI in the future that'll start to fill some of that stuff in? Probably, but it's really not that cumbersome for me to have a polarizer on the front. And even if you're not using like a drop-in or a square system, you can get screw-in ones. There's magnetic ones that can snap on the front of your lens. So these aren't typically difficult to use, and the results are great. And I can spend less time with the computer doing things, as much as I love post-processing, and more time with the camera and out in nature and capturing the photos. So, again, take a look at the differences here. And, these were taken just a couple of minutes apart. But, the greens on the left-hand side, they're all dull and flat, and they're much more vibrant here. Those reflections and those glares being managed. And this is really the big part of it right through here. You can see all of that wonderful shallow riverbed. So that's my case for having a polarizer in your bag. Now, the second type of filter I use a lot are neutral density filters. What these are is a darker piece of glass, and there are a variety of stops. What they do is reduce the amount of light entering your camera, and that means to get a proper exposure, you need to leave the camera shutter open longer. So this is where we start to get streaks of motion, whether it be traffic, in my case a lot of seascapes, or if you're shooting a busy area and use a really heavy amount of ND filters, people moving through a scene would disappear because they're just not staying in a place long enough for that light to be reflected off them and be absorbed back in your sensor. And again, let's take a look at an example set of images here. On the left, I have a shot where there is no filters whatsoever. And on the right, we have one a few minutes later with a 10-stop filter. So a very long exposure, like 60 plus seconds. And notice, the water gets all smoky and nice. And so the question is, well, could I do this in post-processing? And the answer is somewhat. There are some cameras, actually, some of the older Sony cameras have applications in the camera that will take a series of photos, like maybe 30, 40, 50 photos, and then kind of blend all those together. Anything that's not moving, it will keep those there, and anything that is moving will smooth all that out. And it works nice for certain scenes. And then AI is kind of getting there. I do want to show a different example where the AI is somewhat working. But for a 10-stop filter, I mean, this is a really, really dark piece of glass. You probably can't even see my hand through it. Carrying this around versus taking 40 photos and then blending them in post-processing. For me, there's a couple of reasons I carry the filter. First is I don't have to worry about processing power. I don't have to worry about the computer interpreting the scene differently than I want it to. And there's just some nuances that happen as we look at these photos here. Notice in this photo, let me zoom in here. We can see the rocks. They're very crisp. They're very clear in both photos. And these both have the same processing applied to them. There's no difference in the processing. But notice there's just a bit of an air of mist. Somehow this is just slightly softer because there is sea spray and things getting thrown up about there. And that's the kind of stuff that, at least presently, the tools can miss. A second example would be if I want to do a long exposure well, how long do I want to keep the shutter open? As opposed to I want to take a 10-second exposure versus how many frames do I tell a camera to take, and then how many do I need to blend together to make certain things. There are certain looks that, at least presently, are easier when you just think about them naturally. I see a tree swaying about and I want to get like an impressionist type painting feel to it. I might leave the shutter open for 3 or 4 seconds. Maybe that means I reach for a lighter grade neutral density filter. This is a 4-stop. You can kind of see through it there, hopefully through the camera, where a little bit of the light will be reduced, and so I have to have that shutter open a little bit longer, but I get to control that. And where the tools also need to be taught about different objects and scenes, they're getting better all the time. Only thing I have to worry about is, does this glass obey the laws of physics? They do. And so I don't have to think about any of that. So this is why I carry these in my bag. And there's one other scenario that I use a 4-stop or a 6-stop often, and that's for streaks of water and streaks of motion. Let's take a look at a photo, an example of this one here. So this photo, also unprocessed, I think this was maybe a second or two, half a second, 0.4 seconds. And we have these fingers and streaks of water. It's adding a nice level of motion into the scene. Now, if I were to try to capture this with a series of photos and then blend them together, the challenge there will be how fast is your camera at taking shots and how smooth will that blend be. The analogy I like to use is with music. If you look at any music now, it's pretty much distributed digitally. But the master tapes are usually done in analog. And the reason for that is anything digital, no matter how fine each sample is, there are discrete sample points versus one continuous recording of music. Same idea with capturing light. With using the filter, I get one nice continuous smooth stream of capture. I don't have any artifacts, any breaks in here. Now with a scene like this, there are applications that are getting pretty good. There's even some for like iPhone where you take actually a very short video and the tools do some magic and interpret what's moving, what's not, and create smooth fingers of water. Once again, the tool needs to be taught about the different scenes. I'll use that impressionist notion of a tree. How much do I want that tree to sway back and forth? Well, I can control that very easily with my camera and filters. I get to decide how many seconds do I want. I get to consider how fast is the wind blowing that day and how much is the tree really moving. All of those are decisions I can make based on real world situations. So maybe call me old school. I still want my ND filters in my filter bag. Now, the one other type of filter that I get asked about often are ND grad filters, neutral density graduated filters. You've probably seen these before. Maybe you have some in your bag where at the top of the filter, one end of the filter, it's dark and then it slowly gradates to clear glass. And the classic use of that is to darken or brighten a background or a foreground. In the case of landscapes, we'd use it most often to darken the sky. This is a filter that I don't carry. I think that it's unnecessary because of the digital tools that we have now. And my rationale for that is very rarely do I have a clean horizon across my photo from edge to edge. And this is from a guy who shoots at the ocean a lot. If anywhere I was going to have a clean horizon, it's at the ocean. And let's go back to this one example we looked at before. If I were to take a digital filter, take a neutral density graduated filter and line it up with the horizon, I'd end up darkening a bit of these trees. Is that the end of the world? No, of course not. I'd come in the tools and I'd brighten that area up. Well, I could just as easily come in the tool and darken the sky and not have to carry the extra glass. And this is a pretty tame example. Imagine a scene where you're in mountains and have a valley. There's, a lake that's in the valley and the mountains are coming in from both sides and you've got a very bright sky. As soon as you start doing that, you can't make a V shape out of your graduated ND piece of glass. You get a certain horizontal line, or you can rotate it a little bit to get some type of angle to it. But at some point you're making a trade-off. You're going to choose to either darken something more that you don't want to, or leave something brighter than you would prefer. And either way, you're coming into your digital tools and cleaning things up. So for that reason, I don't carry graduated ND filters. That's a piece of gear I think is unnecessary for me to carry because I have good tools to work with and because we have good cameras that can capture a very wide dynamic range and give us the data that we're able to work with in the tools. I hope this helps folks out if you're thinking about filters and what you do or don't care about. I do think it depends on your photographic style. If you're not doing a lot of long exposures, maybe you're doing an occasional picture of a waterfall or something, maybe you want to look at the apps that take a few photos and blend them together, and maybe that's all you need. But if you're doing more types of longer exposure work, you want more control, I think having the physical filters gives you that control and lets you create the photo that you truly want without relying on the tools. Leverage the tools, definitely. Relying on them to do everything for you, I'm not quite there yet. And I don't think the tools are quite there yet either. But anyway, to recap it up, I got UV filters to protect the front element, polarizer to manage glare and reflections, and neutral density filters to do my long exposures. I don't carry graduated NDs. At some point, I'm going to have to make a choice in the field, and I may as well just do my darkening or brightening in the digital darkroom. If you got questions about photography, about filters, whatever it might be, drop them in the comments. You want to keep it private, send it to me through my website. Thanks very much for watching this video. My name's Scott Davenport, and until next time, happy shooting.